আসসালামু আলাইকুম। হ্যালো এভরিওয়ান। সবাইকে আমন্ত্রণ ইউএস এমবাসি ঢাকা এবং দেশ টিভির বিশেষ আয়োজন আ কনভারসেশন উইথ বাংলাদেশ, বাংলাদেশের সাথে আড্ডা অনুষ্ঠানে। আপনারা জানেন আমরা প্রতি মাসে আমাদের অনুষ্ঠানে একজন উচ্চপদস্থ মার্কিন কর্মকর্তার সাথে আড্ডা দিই বিভিন্ন গুরুত্বপূর্ণ ইস্যু নিয়ে। গত এপিসোডে আমাদের সাথে ছিলেন ইউএস অ্যাম্বাসেডর ড্যান মোজিনা এবং আমরা কথা বলেছিলাম বাংলাদেশের অর্থনীতি এবং বাংলাদেশের সম্ভাবনা নিয়ে।
The first point about young people is they're actually the leaders of today. In Bangladesh, they are the leaders of today and the leaders of tomorrow.
আমাদের আজকের আড্ডার বিষয় বাংলাদেশে নারীর অবস্থান এবং কিভাবে নারীর ক্ষমতায়ন বাংলাদেশের উন্নয়নে বিরাট ভূমিকা রাখতে পারে। এবং এ ব্যাপারে আলোচনা করতে আমাদের সাথে একজন স্পেশাল গেস্ট আছেন। USAID's Senior Coordinator for Gender Equality and Women Empowerment, Ms. Carla Koppell. Ms. Koppell, welcome to a conversation with Bangladesh.
Thank you so much for having me.
আমাদের সাথে আরো উপস্থিত আছেন Center for Leadership Assistance and Promotion এর co-founder Ms. Momita Boshak. Momita, welcome to a conversation with Bangladesh.
Thank you, Sabir Bhai. I feel honored to be here today, and I'm very much looking forward to this conversation as Ms. Carla Koppell, Senior Coordinator of USAID is here. It's my great pleasure to have a conversation with you, ma'am.
We are also looking forward to it. দর্শক আপনারা জানেন আমরা বারবার বলি আমাদের শোতে বাংলাদেশের সাথে আড্ডা মানেই বাংলাদেশের তরুণদের সাথে আড্ডা, আর এজন্যই বরাবরের মতো আমাদের সাথে আছেন কিছু ইয়াং প্যানেলিস্ট। ওয়েলকাম টু আ কনভারসেশন উইথ বাংলাদেশ। So Ms. Koppell, welcome to Bangladesh. So what brings you here to Bangladesh?
Well, apart from just wanting to see your beautiful country, I'm here to launch a South Asian Female Parliamentarians Network. As you know, the number of female parliamentarians has been growing around the world, but particularly here in South Asia. And there's a real opportunity, I think, in joining hands among those female leaders to make real progress on critical developmental issues that the subcontinent faces.
As you just mentioned that women are critical for progress, so why is it so essential to ensure women and girls' well-being for overall development around the world?
Well, you know, I come into this position as the global coordinator for gender equality and women's empowerment because there's a recognition that unless we do a better job in delivering for women and girls, we're not going to achieve development. It's very simple and makes absolute sense. You cannot leave behind half the population of the globe or of any given continent around the world and aspire to have development that is sustainable and peaceful. Women and girls bring different perspectives. They bring different expertise, and they're essential for the economic, political, and social well-being of all societies globally.
Momita, you're a social entrepreneur, so maybe you can add.
Yeah, so as you are already talking about how women and gender equality, women empowerment and gender equality can ensure peace. So I wanted to ask you, because you are the senior coordinator of USAID, so what USAID is taking steps or seeking to elevate attention to gender and how they are giving this importance to girls in their development work field.
Well, there are many different ways. Let me start by saying in my first year in my position, what we've done is wholly refine the entire architecture around looking at gender equality and women's empowerment issues. So we have a new set of policies and strategies. What do those policies and strategies say? Well, they say that we must be closing gaps in achievement between men and women and boys and girls. So where we see women falling behind or men and boys falling behind, we need to work to address those gaps. It says that we need to leverage the leadership potential that exists in women. Too often we're thinking only of women as beneficiaries of programs and as those who have needs. We need to remember that they're an incredible source of leadership and agents of change around the world. And then it says that we need to make sure that we are recognizing and delivering on the social, political, and economic rights of everybody within societies. How does that translate in programs? Well, since we do programs in a wide range of different sectors around the world, I'll just talk about a couple. I mentioned already the role of women in parliaments around the world, and there's parliamentary strengthening efforts that we're engaging in globally. Just today, I traveled to visit a leather factory here in Bangladesh and looked at a factory where they now favor 65% female employees and 35% men because they're trying to close the gaps in employment between men and women and girls and the roles that girls and boys play. Now, how are they hiring women and why are they hiring women? Well, it's very interesting. First of all, they're finding that they're offering certain benefits like childcare to enable women to come into the workforce. And I said, well, what is the value of that childcare? And they said, well, it's very interesting. First of all, it attracts a whole new class of workers that we couldn't have before. But what it's also doing for our company is it's improving retention. So now people see the benefits of providing daycare for the company, not just for the men and women within the company, but for the company as a whole. It's decreasing absenteeism. It's increasing the commitment that people have to those firms. So while we're advancing the economic empowerment of women, we're also improving the situation of companies here in Bangladesh.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Koppell. And now I would like to hear from our young panelists here. As we see that there are many initiatives taken by the government and the non-government organizations. So according to you, do you think that this is adequate, or what more can be done?
Well, I work in One Degree Initiative, and currently we're running a campaign against eve-teasing. And eve-teasing is a tantamount, according to High Court, is tantamount to sexual harassment. So what we are trying to understand the dynamics of eve-teasing, why it occurs, how it occurs, where it occurs, and there hasn't been any credible research done on this topic. So we have done a survey on eve-teasing, and what we have found out that most of the eve-teasing has actually occurred when the attire of the women is actually salwar kameez, which is pretty acceptable in the culture of Bangladesh. Although there is a wide perception in Bangladesh that women are actually being eve-teased because of the Western attire of the girls. So that hasn't been true, and we have found no correlation whatsoever between attire and eve-teasing occurrences. So we are trying to create the awareness among the people.
Well, in Bangladesh, a lot of initiatives are taken by the government as well as at the individual level. I personally plan to set up a healthcare center for the underprivileged garment workers in Bangladesh. It's going to be a social business.
That's wonderful that you're doing that. I went to visit today a health clinic that USAID is supporting for low-income families, and it's incredibly important. And I know that Bangladesh has made enormous strides in child and maternal health and the status of families, and particularly women and children. So I think that's a really important contribution. I wanted to mention this issue of teasing and harassment. Obviously, is a broader concern related to gender-based violence writ large. And when we talk about gender-based violence, it can be underage marriage, it can be domestic abuse, it can be a whole range of different ways in which people can suffer. And there was a study recently that was done that found that the cost of gender-based violence, I believe in Bangladesh, are something like 2% of your gross domestic product. So you can imagine that if you were able to eliminate gender-based violence within Bangladesh, what it would do for your society and your economy. So I think it's very important that you're doing that work.
I think to add to the eve-teasing issue, it's not only out on the streets or domestic violence or child marriage. It's also at work. I mean, women who are trying to achieve something in life, they are working, but they face a lot of harassment at work. So I think it's really important that if we can have policies at companies that basically challenge these people, the ones who harass people, right? To basically for companies to take action against these.
So we have policies, but we need to implement. So Momita.
I would like to add on to that point when they are talking about the policy and the enforcement of those policies. Yeah, we do have a lot of policies. We know that we have signed for, Bangladesh is a signatory for UN Convention of, we are against all forms of violence. We are signatory for that. And then we have signed numerous these types of convention. But if you see the enforcement of this law, or in how they are enacting those laws, those policies are not really transparent. So that creates a huge problem for us while working. Mm-hmm. We know there are existence of policies, so there is not enough transparency between the the policies and the implementation of policies.
So if you think about the Bangladeshi context, what do you think are the best strategies for advancing the implementation of these policies?
The demand should be there from the people's perspective. People should understand that this is a problem, we need to handle this right now. Government, cannot just impose this on the people. People should have this feeling, this understanding, this realization realization that this is a problem, and if not handled right now, this will have social consequences.
And also, that also applies for all the other women and gender-related issues. As we talk about gender issues and women issues, so Ms. Koppell, my next question to you is like, how does gender issues differ from women issues, and how does men and boys fit into that?
Women's issues are those that are specific to the status of women and whether or not they're doing well within society, what their specific needs are, what the opportunities and what their expertise is. And so if you're dealing with gender, you're dealing with women's issues in a context that involves men and boys as well, and how those relationships move. Any effort to advance women needs to involve men and boys, for a number of reasons. First of all, because the best outcome is always achieved by involving everybody in a society. It's no better for me to stand up and say, go women, in the absence of men, than it is to say, oh, we've just been working with men and that's good enough. It takes a village. It takes everybody within societies to work together. On this point of how we advocate for implementation, in my experience, in essence, I'm a sort of global advocate, right? I go around the world and I talk about why this matters. And I think that it's important for us to remember that there are lots of different ways that we can make the case for these issues being important. First of all, if we're talking about gender-based violence, we're talking about fundamental violation of rights. And the protection of human rights. And there are men who are victims of gender-based violence. There are members of the LGBT community who are victims of gender-based violence. And there are women and girls who are victims as well. It is absolutely unacceptable that people suffer these violations. That having been said, that argument will only resonate with some people. And so you then turn to arguments about whether or not it is effective and to have a society in which gender-based violence continues, in which you have enormous numbers of child marriages, in which you have sexual and domestic abuse in the home and outside the home. And there's plenty of statistical evidence that shows that it doesn't make sense, that it's not only taking away from the economic and social and political well-being of societies and tearing at the fabric of those societies, but that it also creates instability.
দর্শক, আড্ডার এই পর্যায়ে ছোট্ট একটা বিরতি নিচ্ছি, আমাদের সাথেই থাকুন, ফিরছি কিছুক্ষণের মধ্যেই। দর্শক সবাইকে স্বাগত A Conversation with Bangladesh, বাংলাদেশের সাথে আড্ডা অনুষ্ঠানে। As Ms. Koppell mentioned that the women issues cannot be addressed without involving men. So my question to the men present here, that how do you feel about it? How the male participation can change the scenario?
What I think, it's the men and woman relationship should be like a cart, like the two wheels. The one wheel should complement another, or the society won't move. So it should be a complementing relationship on both. One should complement another. So if a relationship is this sort of relationship is maintained, one complementing another and one reciprocating to another, there should be not a problem between the two genders.
Now my question to the girls here, that do you think that the male mindset is hindering the progress of women in Bangladesh particularly?
In most of the cases, what happens is that in most of the husbands want their wives to be educated, but like after marriage, they just don't stop. They just stop their wives, like don't go for work or any social involvement. So I want to say that like we have to change those men's perspective as well. It's not only us that we want to do something, that men have to change their thinking towards women.
Yeah, in addition to what she said, I'd like to add that nowadays people think that women empowerment is also about women dominating over men. There is that, I would say, wrong perspective. So I think men need to be made aware that women empowerment is not about women dominating over them or about changing the entire household or family structure, but it's actually about giving women the basic rights that they need, or letting women be made available like to their basic rights. Yeah.
Can I add something to that? Basically, I think women empowerment is a solution to reduce stress for men. I think it's a solution for men, not for us. If we are working, then my husband way back home can rest. That all right. It's not only me who's working and bringing the income at home. It's someone else as well. Right. In case I get sick, my family is not going to stay hungry. There is someone who's going to bring food at home.
It's interesting. To your point, I was in a community in Kenya, and in this community, the men do the cattle herding. And they had started a project with women getting involved in fattening cattle and then selling them off for a profit. So I was having a meeting and I was talking mostly with the women in the community, and at some point I turned to the men and I said, well, what do you think? I mean, these women are working with cattle, you know, how is that, you know, is that okay? And the gentleman said, you know, it's all right because it allows me to share decision-making responsibility with my wife. I mean, now I share the burdens, I share these discussions, and I'm not alone in feeling like I'm the only one who has to provide. So I would never have guessed that would have been his answer, but it was, and it was exactly to your point. And I think what we need to recognize is that it's an opportunity for families to become stronger. For nobody to feel the sole burden of providing for the family, and nobody to feel the sole burden of taking care of the children, and it's really about familial responsibility.
Yeah, I totally agree to your point, Ms. Koppell, when you said about the recognizing the importance of gender integration, where man and both should come together and work for, like in every single field. Even if it's a labor force participation in every places, we need equality, not one above other. So there comes another point. When we talk about gender equality, we also deals with other issues like transgender individual in Bangladesh as well. It's not only, it's not a phenomena in the US, it's here as well. Maybe they are very small in number. They are not, we are working like our organization CLAP in Chittagong. We are working with only 300 transgender individuals. We call them Hijra in South Asia, then known as Hijra. So these 300, they are actually totally, they are not getting their civil liberties. We forget about all those basic rights and other things. We have that common, we have perception, we are afraid of them. We don't go near to them because we think that they are totally from different gender. So in order to minimize the gap between the youth and those transgender, because they are the one who are afraid of those people, so CLAP is working towards to secure their civil liberties. So I think some of our members can also talk about that. Ayman, would you like to talk about it?
Like, first when I was introduced, I would share a simple story of how I was introduced to the program. Like, Momita Apu asked me, like, Ayman, go talk about the transgender, like Hijra, in front of the whole crowd. Like, there was a crowd, we were having a presentation, like, the next day they would go into the workshop, and I was asked to talk. I was really afraid, like, I was asked to go, like, the program took place, if you remember, Momita Apu, the program took place in American Corner in Chittagong. I was asked to introduce the leader, like, her name was Falguni Appa. I was asked to introduce her to the other volunteers who would next day go into the community to have a workshop with the other Hijras. So I was really afraid, but Momita was like, you can do it. So I went up. And then I had the feeling in me, like, they are a part of a society too.
Ms. Koppell, can we have your thoughts?
Sure. I mean, the United States government recently has made important strides in how it works both to advance the status of transgender people within the U.S. government itself and also through programs that USAID supports. I think it's absolutely essential that we be supportive of the weakest members in society. It's a measure of the extent to which society is protecting the rights of all. And transgender members of society no less than any others. The Obama administration has the first 2 transgender political appointees the administration has put forward, and one is within USAID, and she's an incredible role model.
দর্শক, আবারও ছোট্ট একটা বিরতি, আমাদের সাথেই থাকুন। দর্শক সবাইকে স্বাগত A Conversation with Bangladesh, বাংলাদেশের সাথে আড্ডা অনুষ্ঠানে। Our viewers, they had the opportunity to post their questions to you on our US Embassy Dhaka's Facebook page. So we have chosen 2 questions. I'll read out the first one. It's from Mr. Zakir Hussain, and his question is, how can the Bangladesh government help empower the rights of poor female garment workers?
I think there are a number of ways. The first is to the points that were made earlier from some of the people who are with us today, is in making sure that we are abiding by the rules and regulations that currently exist to protect workers' rights. Incredibly important. I know that a lot of rules exist, codes of conduct, regulations, and laws, and they're not necessarily being stood by. I think we need to make sure that that enforcement is being ramped up. I think there need to be checks to see whether there is compliance, and I think that there needs to be an examination of the benefits that accrue to female garment workers to make sure that the workplace environment is one that's conducive to their success, that grants them a living wage, and then enables them to both provide for their family and their children while giving them economic well-being.
As in the beginning of our conversation, we were talking about politics. This tour is all about you are going to the South Asian different countries, and where women's parliamentary seats are reservation for women are increasing. So the next question is actually regarding that. So Ms. Koppell, what do you think of the role and importance of women in government and legislature in Bangladesh?
Oh, I think it's incredibly important. I think that bringing women's voices into government adds another dimension to how leadership is handled, both in terms of the substance and the process of that leadership. If you look in countries, for example, the only country with a majority female parliament is Rwanda in Africa. 56% are 56% female. And what do you see as a result of that? Well, you see changes in critical laws surrounding citizenship and citizenship rights of women and their children, inheritance, land tenure. Those have been advanced by women, in addition to issues related to child protection and related to gender-based violence. But what you also see is changes in the approach to governance and promoting more inclusive, more transparent, and more participatory governance structures. And those things are really important, because what they do is they bring other voices to the conversation. So I see the set-asides as a critical stepping stone to making sure that that women have a voice in government. You know, you're ahead of the United States. We're at just over 16% women in our legislature. So we have a way to go in ensuring a proportionate representation of women in our legislature. But I think there's enormous opportunity that's offered by bringing in women's voices. We see that whenever we see a critical mass of women or men, that the issues they bring to the conversations are unique and different.
Our major political parties are headed by women, and also our current Prime Minister, the head of the opposition, the Home Minister, and the Foreign Minister, like all of them are women. So my question to the panelists, do you think that the scene has been set for change? So are we going to see changes in our society as more and more female, we see more and more female participation in politics and legislative councils?
I believe we are more accustomed to the idea that women can be leaders, but I really don't think, I didn't feel that there has been a significant change in terms of political perception in Bangladesh. I mean, I don't think people actually believe that whether it's men or women, it makes any difference to whatsoever in case of change in political scenario. Yes, I think the only benefit that, or only positive side that we are getting out of this, out of the thing that both parties are actually headed by females, is that we are actually accustomed to this idea that women can be leaders. That's a positive feedback that I get from this scenario.
But then again, whenever anything happens regarding political issues and stuff, people have the habit, the commoners have this habit of saying that this country is going down because of two females. We have them up there, but then again, all the blame comes down to them every time something happens to our country. I really wish this changes as soon as possible.
Like, I have a question to the whole panel here. Like, we have seen all the political faces, like, say, female or male, they're repeating. I have a question to the whole panel. Why isn't new female faces coming up in the political scenario?
I would like to say and add on to Ayman's point, we not only see repetition of leaders, political leaders, but also there is a lack of young women political leaders. So I think that's the place where we need to work on Bangladesh politics. We need to work on. We need more and more youth. We need to encourage them to be involved in politics. Youth can be the change. We can pioneer. We can pioneer even if there is not enough opportunity. We can be the change that we want to see.
It's very obvious that we don't have good leaders right now, but we are growing. We are having some changes, and we do expect a woman will come up and head on with the government and all. And it's time, I think it will sooner or be very soon, you will see some few good leaders who will be women.
Ms. Koppell.
I think one thing that's interesting, the most compelling research that I've seen on the role of women's leadership comes out of India, where there's a set-aside at the panchayat level, and there's been actual research that analyzes what kind of difference it's made. And what you see is that it's changed the expenditures have shifted at the local level from to increase expenditures on water and sanitation, which are things which women particularly care about. But what has also been interesting is that it's changed the level of aspiration of young girls, and it's changed the education levels and the investments in education for girls. And I think that's because they see models and they see people that they believe could be them one day, and so it's changed the way people think about girls versus boys and the need to invest in them. My sense is that part of the key is exactly what you're talking about. It's creating a cadre of young leaders that are mentored and brought up through the system so that you really have a generation and a following generation of women leaders that follow on the first, because it's not just the first people who get into office, it's what comes next and what builds after them and how you create a legacy that lasts into the future.
দর্শক, আবারও ছোট্ট একটা বিরতি নিচ্ছি, আমাদের সাথেই থাকুন, ফিরছি কিছুক্ষণের মধ্যেই। স্বাগত আরেকবার কনভারসেশন উইথ বাংলাদেশ, বাংলাদেশের সাথে আড্ডা অনুষ্ঠানে। Ms. Koppell, you've been a very successful woman, and so how was your experience?
I have to say, I think I benefited from two things. Within the American context, I was not the first generation of women. The first generation of women were people like my mother and my grandmother. And my mother, when she got her PhD, she was teaching students, she couldn't go into the faculty club to sit with her students. She had to sit in the basement because women weren't allowed in the faculty club to teach. And now one of the female members of the Supreme Court had been dean at the school where she taught and went on to sit on the U.S. Supreme Court. So I was talking with her, and she said, you know, it's not so bad. 40 years later, we got from me sitting in the basement of the faculty club to a woman on the Supreme Court. So that's one. I think that generation of real lead women created a much easier path for people like me. The second is I came from a family where I had a brother and I have a little sister, and we were all treated very much equally. There was never any differentiation, and that was true for my mother and that was true for my father. And so I never really thought about the fact that I was a woman and therefore my potential was limited, nor did they ever believe that there was anything I couldn't do that my brother could do. And that creates an incredibly important foundation.
As you have mentioned that you could easily match up with your brother, so our next Facebook question is regarding to this, and it's been asked by Ms. Sharmin Ahmed, and her question is, in Bangladesh, many women are qualified for top management positions, but they don't get the same positions or salaries as men. What is your opinion about this, and how do we solve this problem?
Well, I obviously think that's bad. We have a problem with a wage gap in the United States as well. And we also have a problem with a disproportionately small number of women on corporate boards, for example. And it's something that we are really seeking to improve on in the United States and to understand why that's the case. Part of my job is looking within the U.S. Agency for International Development and how we're doing. And right now we have a majority female pool of new employees, but we have a gap in terms of our senior ranks, somewhere approaching 40%. So it's approaching 60% in terms of our entry-level employees and approaching 40% in terms of senior management. We're trying to understand why that's the case. And I heard a story the other day that I thought was very interesting. I believe it was in Argentina, that they had recognized that they had a gap in senior management positions, and they didn't understand why. And one thing they did was they started to take all of the applications for positions and take out anything that would indicate whether it was a man or a woman. And they instantaneously had something like a 25% increase in the selection of women for senior management positions. And so there was an unconscious bias, even though there was no real bias within the system, of what people were thinking made the right characteristics for management. I think we need to do that kind of analysis to understand where the bias is explicit, but to also understand where the bias is unintentional and implicit, and to try to root it out of the system in the structures we create, in the way we process the process of promotions, the values we seek, because the way we describe things can sometimes lead us to certain conclusions about the kinds of leaders that we want.
So the panelists, do you think that this is a prevailing problem in Bangladesh, the wage gap between men and women?
Yes, of course. It is. The most important thing to do is change the perception of people, and it will start from family. The first institution we get into, it's a family. If I get equal rights and equal privilege in my family, I'll expect the same from the others. And if I see my dad respecting my mother equally, then I will do the same when I go out from my family and be in the society.
At this point of our conversation, I would like to discuss again one of the burning issues in Bangladesh, that is child marriage. I would like to ask you why child marriage must end for the well-being of individuals and societies in Bangladesh, you think?
Oh, there's an enormously compelling case for ending child marriage. I mean, I think that, as you said, it's a cycle. You can also flip it the other way. That is, the more you educate your young women and girls, the more likely they are to put off marriage, to invest in the health and nutritional well-being of their children, and the dropout rates for girls who get married is tremendous. So it's absolutely critically important that we hold off on letting girls get married. It has negative effects for the women and for her children. It has negative effects for the well-being of that family, and it has enormous societal consequences that endure. If we were able to raise the marital age, we would be able to bring with it enormous benefits for economy and society in Bangladesh and also around the world.
My question to the panelists, do you think that education can be the remedy of all these problems?
We know that the legal age for marriage for women is 18, but how many of the grassroots level people know about that? Like, they are not aware about it. So if education at that level is set, then I believe that the family will be open to more choices. The parents will be aware that they wouldn't have to marry off their child. And I also think, and I think most of us will agree, that child marriage actually takes place due to financial constraints on the family. So if education is available, definitely then a lot more doors will be open for that family.
I think education is really a really big factor when it comes to not only child marriage, but women empowerment in general. But it's also a problem because, say, in some developed countries, education is of really high quality. Say in Saudi Arabia, it's of the topmost quality in the world, amongst the world, right? Even for women. But then that's where it ends for women. There's no further development or anything. So I think it's really important that we not only provide education, but we also sort of close the gap between education and further development, say in the job sector or health or anything that's related to development.
I completely agree. I think that education is a fundamental building block. It is necessary but not sufficient to sort of the success of women and girls in society and to those societies as a whole. But you point out a number of really critical facts. First of all, the quality of the education matters a lot. We at USAID actually are putting an increased emphasis on the quality of education, not just the number of people being educated. I was talking with the head of our programs in Malawi the other day, and he said that they've reached something like almost universal primary education, and yet when they test, 87% of the children, I believe I'm getting the statistic right, couldn't even identify a letter of the alphabet. So what kind of education is it if people are enrolled but they don't even know the alphabet. So the quality of education, which you mentioned, is absolutely critical. The other is obviously creating the opportunities and the economic opportunities, whether that's by creating a cultural environment that accepts women in the workforce, or whether that's by creating economic opportunities that, that enable women to work. One of the things we're looking at is very simple. When we're investing in infrastructure, are we building women's bathrooms? So that when women go to work, they find a workplace where they can actually function. And part of it is connecting these links in a chain. We educate women, we ready the workplace for their engagement, we create facilities that enable them to work there, and then we allow them to come into the workforce and work for a fair wage that is equitable. And unless we follow all of those steps in the chain, we're not going to have the full benefits of the women and girls in our societies.
Thank you, Ms. Koppell. As throughout our conversation, everyone stressed that ensuring female well-being is very critical for our development. So, but how does that the gender issue is relevant to responding natural disasters?
In the U.S. government have recently put together something called a National Action Plan on Women, Peace and Security that looks at the issues related to responding to providing humanitarian relief. And there are many issues for women. So, for example, why are women more vulnerable when natural disasters hit? Well, they're more vulnerable because often they've been kept closer to home, and so they have less awareness of how to escape and how to reduce their vulnerability. They're often active in areas that increase and doing tasks that increase their vulnerability and their need for assistance. When people are displaced by floods, for example, and they go into temporary housing, is the temporary housing set up in ways that create vulnerability for them to attack within displaced people camps? How do they continue on with their daily life? Do they need to collect water, fuel wood? Does that pose a threat to their security and their well-being? Do girls and boys learn to swim and in equal numbers? And if they don't learn to swim in equal numbers, we can see that when any kind of flooding takes place, that the girls are more vulnerable than the boys. So there are many different ways in which gender plays a role in the way we respond to a natural disaster, in the extent to which men versus women are vulnerable in the case of disaster, and how we need to provide for the victims of that natural disaster in ways that enable them to get back on their feet. Simple things like, if we're giving out food rations, are we giving them in bags that women can carry? Are we giving them to women and men so that they are being shared among the entire population? Are they being delivered in places that are safe and where women can then get their supplies back home without having a risk of theft or a risk of attack?
Thank you very much, Ms. Koppell. Unfortunately, we are at the end of our conversation, but before we say goodbye, can you please offer any final thoughts for the youth of Bangladesh?
Well, first of all, I'm honored to be here in your beautiful country. So I want to tell you how much hope I see in all of your faces and bright shining eyes. The second thing I would say is a bit related to the substance of this conversation. I think what we need to remember is that this is not a conversation about women and girls and men and boys, or women and girls versus men and boys. This is about how we build strong societies. And the key to thinking about building strong societies is thinking about how we move whole societies forward and create progress that can endure and deliver benefits for everybody. And if we think about it in that way, it becomes self-evident that we need to lift all boats as we move development forward, because that will provide the best outcomes. So thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Momita. Thank you, panelists. দর্শক, আমাদের আড্ডা আজ এ পর্যন্তই। পরের মাসে আমরা আবারও আসব নতুন কোনো অতিথি নিয়ে, নতুন কোনো বিষয় আড্ডা দিতে। সবাই ভালো থাকুন আর দেশের সাথেই থাকুন।